geology department labs. And we've got Marina to help us investigate a little bit about how the Hawaiian Islands formed. And behind her is a map, which we're going to zoom on now, and she's going to narrate.
Okay. Well, here's a map of the world showing the underwater topography. And this was composed by Marie Tharp and her colleagues at Columbia University. And we're actually going to focus right over here where the Pacific Ocean is and the Hawaiian Islands, since the Hawaiian Islands are composed of volcanoes. And if we focus on the Hawaiian Islands, here they are, and follow them along, we see little underwater mountains going off in a line.
If we take from the archives at the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory some of the archived footage and begin thinking about this problem, where did the Hawaiian volcanoes come from? Here, in an aerial overflight, is a circular path being taken around Pu'u'o'o, one of the vents on Kilauea, and we're seeing a volcanic eruption in progress. So our first clue comes from what has already been said, that there is volcanicity here in Hawaii. As the caption is telling you, this is just one of many episodes of eruption that have occurred out of the same vent, the Pu'u'o'o vent. The volcanologist would call such an eruption a subaerial eruption, which is just a long way of saying it's under the air, subaerial. But the Hawaiian Islands, as we saw from the Marie Tharp map, must have started underwater and built their way up. So the magma has to be coming from deeper inside the earth and pouring out in eruptions such as we're seeing here that is subaerial. The subaerial eruptions cool fairly slowly. We see that the lava is still red hot with just a somewhat black crust over it here in this channel. If, on the other hand, we think of some of the submarine eruptions where you'd have to go down with a submarine to see it, in other words, eruptions on the floor of the ocean, instead of a helicopter, use a submarine, you would find that these quench very much faster in the cold water as they pour out on the floor of the ocean. But it still would take a long time, as the caption is telling you, to build up flow after flow and pile up about 3,000 feet of lava so that it changed from being submarine to subaerial. By contrast, we're seeing here that the flow is continuing on down the slope with some fair amount of velocity, not quenched like it would be underwater. Underwater, it would still take many cubic kilometers of lava to be added, and many such flows, as the caption says, to build up the island from the depth of the water around Hawaii. When geologists talk long and short times, it's not in terms of human lifetimes, but usually more like millions of years of processes that need to accumulate. Since it's easier to study subaerial eruptions, let us take a look at one such episode happening at Pu'u'o'o, where many such episodes have occurred in the last couple of decades. The lava here is fountaining, being driven up by gas pressure and perhaps also other types of flow pressure, and building, as it falls back, a cinder cone that we can look down from an aerial overview in this view. On the floor of Pu'u'o'o, periodically lava oozes out when it's not fountaining, and like almost filling a bathtub, begins to fill the caldera, or the fire pit, inside the cone that it has built with earlier spatter and ashes. Here is one such very dramatic episode. Again, notice how quickly the red lava freezes up across the surface, at least skin deep it has become cold and black. Depending on the depth of the lava that may be accumulating in this lake, which it really is a lava lake, it may take decades for it to cool to the bottom. Studies done in Hawaii by the HVO staff at a place called Makapui Lava Lake showed it was 300 feet deep, and its cooling may have taken 30 to 40 years. As we're seeing on the floor of Pu'u'o'o, at a time when it had crusted over strongly enough that it was safe to go into the crater, we're seeing these chimney-like spires build up by a single crack perhaps in the crusted floor, which begins to ooze and spit and spatter. Perhaps think of it as a safety valve on a pressure system. The lava that's under the cold crust still has pressure inside of it, and perhaps even new arriving lava. So this is like a leaky crust phenomenon here. One of the HVO workers had spread some glass wool as a landing pad, you might say, for the spatter shooting out of the hornito. And as the glass quenched into some really fantastic shapes here, which he put on display in the lobby of HVO. We just put a quarter in the picture in case you were having trouble understanding the scale of these pieces of spatter that had been produced in the footage that we were watching previously. In volcanology, it's often the scale factors that are somewhat confusing, particularly if you've never been there. Here we are, as you see, with a person for scale, standing on the rim of Pu'u'o'o at one time in history, and at the base of the filling in the wall floor contact, another crack apparently has opened, and escaping gas is making almost like a fountain or a fire hydrant splashing of the red-hot molten lava. The lava is probably somewhere around 1100 centigrade, and the safe ability to come on the rim at this quiescent point when it's not fountaining like we've seen in much more active moments in historic tape, and make observations. And it also helps, as we said, understand the size of this vent called Pu'u'o'o. As you look around the walls, you can see a high water mark. Looks like a dirty ring in a bathtub, doesn't it? Where the black lava from this episode has already filled, and as the caption's saying, note levels, layers, white and red and so forth from previous episodes. And in this particular time in history, the sidewall has clearly been blown out by a more violent heave during one of the episodes. So gas smoke is escaping. The ground here in this footage is showing freshly quenched bathtub filling, as we jokingly have called it. And now and again, it continues to crack open, and the lava will issue out. And as we look at this a bit, you will see that it's actually looking very minor according to the scale of the volcano, but as this pours out and down, it is doing its own bit, certainly, about filling this chamber also. As the caption has urged you to think about, where is this lava coming from that keeps seeping up through the floor of Pu'u'o'o? Maybe it's coming from deep, because that's how we think the Hawaiian Islands are forming, but Hawaiian Volcano Observatory has done a lot of work to show that it's a more complicated story than just a simple plumbing system coming from deep up and out in one clear shot. It apparently is coming up and ponding underneath the island of Hawaii at a more shallow depth, and from there erupting on a more frequent basis. Again, notice how the leakage is making a flow out onto the floor of Pu'u'o'o. We need, though, to go back to our thought of a paragraph ago. Where is this really coming from? How complicated is its volcanic process? And so, with that in mind, let's go back a little bit in history for 10 or 20 years and see some of the, has this Pu'u'o'o process been constant over the last couple decades? To do that, we can go into the hallways at HVO and see some of the wonderful displays of archived photographs recounting the history of the Pu'u'o'o, shall we call it, volcanic process. Let me read to you this caption. These two photographs, taken at the same scale from a photo station west of Pu'u'o'o, illustrate both the collapse of the cone and the growth of the episode 50 through 55 lava shield. Here in June 1992, a typical episode of growth and build-up of the Pu'u'o'o vent cone, and in its companion pair photograph coming up on screen, you see quite a different profile, so that by August 1997, after a few additional episodes of eruption at Pu'u'o'o, this is what the profile looked like. If we now overfly in another archived photograph and see a time when Pu'u'o'o was filling, and then yet another time when it erupts, one can gather all of these episodes from a professional paper done by Christine Haliker. So we've spent some time looking at one of these vents, Pu'u'o'o, but it turns out there are at least 4 other active volcanoes on Hawaii. Here in a 3D map, you can see the main ridge in the south center is Mauna Loa, and some of the other volcanoes also red. Similarly, even on Kilauea, there are different modes of eruption than just Pu'u'o'o. Here, one of the rifts or cracks in the side of the flank of Kilauea is putting up a fire curtain, as shown in an archived image from 1960 as taken by Eaton. But let us stay focused on Kilauea and its vent, Pu'u'o'o. The inset map shows us the emperor chain of the Hawaiian Islands, Oahu, where all the flights land, and Hawaii, the big island, and on the south coast of Hawaii, Volcanoes National Park is in fact the area of the entire map, Volcanoes National Park. The purpose of looking at the map is to orient ourselves on some of the features. We are looking at the southern part of the island, which is Kilauea Volcano, one of the 5 volcanoes on the island. And in this program, we will look at features from A to B down to the coastline C, and this pathway is of course not a straight line, but it's one that the lava seems to follow from all of the work that the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory is doing. It starts here at the Caldera in Kilauea at A, and inside the caldera, which is the fire pit, there's yet another fire pit called Hale, and the lava is perhaps only 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers, something like a mile just below the floor of Hale, and apparently it drains outward from that magma to a place here at B called Pu'u'o'o, where for over 20 years there's been a crater erupting. Sometimes the crater blows itself apart, but when it overflows, it makes a lava lake, and it in turn overflows, and the lavas that you can see here in the shaded area over a period of 20 years have gone down and destroyed several towns along the coast. If you notice, the red road abruptly stops right there where I'm pointing. The lava has covered the road on numerous occasions, and so now the road stops right here, and it used to go on around the coast to Hilo. And so from Pu'u'o'o, the, you might say, leaky surface exit of the lava, it runs down the slope and ends up here in the ocean. Quite beautiful display. The footage that you will see is safe in some senses, at least, to be taken, because the fluidity of the basalt here in Hawaii means that it's not terribly explosive, and terribly, of course, means dangerously. The idea that you will see some very violent heaves of magma, it is still very fluid, and so people can approach even the hot molten material fairly closely without the kind of danger that would occur if it was more stiff and sputtering, perhaps like oatmeal cooking on a stove. Schematic of the profile of Kilauea, as we saw in a previous view of the aerial map, from A, the caldera, to B, Pu'u'o'o, a leaky vent, down to C, the ocean entry of lava that escapes. And so magma coming from the hot spot underneath Hawaii comes up into a near summit reservoir. Here's the caldera. At the moment, lava is not intersecting the surface, but it certainly has many times in the past. But there is molten lava here where it's not shaded, about a mile below the summit, and it leaks sideways. Notice the break in horizontal scale here. We wanted to show more detail on over to the right. So this distance, as we're saying, from A here to B is in fact about 10 miles, and from B here on down to the ocean entry is about 7 miles. But back to Pu'u'o'o, the lava is leaking out. Sometimes there's a cinder cone, sometimes there's a small lava lake. It overflows, has been doing this for 20 years, and flow after flow after flow, as the schematic art is trying to show, has gone down. The flows cap themselves with crusting over and then run out from under themselves, thus making lava tubes. Occasionally the crust breaks open and one gets skylights, and then it comes to what may have been many 100,000 years ago the original edge of the island, the cliff, and it increases in speed as it goes down the steeper portion, then comes to a bench and forms new land essentially out into the ocean. As you'll see in some of the footage that we'll show, there are bench cracks, and sometimes these bench portions slump down because the water depth here in the ocean is about 3,000 feet. We'll return quite a few times to this schematic cross-section to show you these features as we go through this. Recall that we started at the top of this profile, and we've already looked at Hale, and how the lava ascends from deep inside the earth, leaks sideways over to Pu'u'o'o. And so what we will do is examine the features along this profile. HVO, the conning tower as it were, looks like an airport tower looking down over Halemaumau crater with some of the visitors. While this pan around at Halemaumau looks fairly extinct, when the missionaries first came to Hawaii in the 1800s, there are sketches where there were maybe as many as 13 bubbling pots of molten magma here on the floor of Halemaumau. And as you've just seen, geophysics shows that it's not far out of sight, just below the surface of the bottom of this fire pit. So let's return again to the ABC profile line and look at it. Oh, the lava is leaking out. Sometimes there's a cinder cone, sometimes there's a small lava lake or fountain. It overflows, has been doing this for 20 years, and flow after flow after flow, as the schematic art is trying to show, has gone down. The flows cap themselves with crusting over and then run out from under themselves, thus making lava tubes. Occasionally the crust breaks open and one gets skylights, and then it comes to what may have been many 100,000 years ago the original edge of the island, called the Pali. But before it gets to that break and slope and speeds up, it's on the flanks and it builds up typical shield kind of flows, and these flows crust over and yet may still have a collapse of the roof to show these kind of skylights, which we've already mentioned. As we zoom in and look, you can see hang down pieces of the cooled lava, almost like cave formation, but below that is still the red hot lava, and if you watch carefully you can see it flowing past this window or this skylight. These flows, as the schematic showed, continue over a period of years, building on top of each other as they in fact cool, and the next episode issues forth from the vent upslope. These skylights are interesting in that they are windows into the process, and the crust that you see one of the HVO staff members standing on is in fact part of the story, an important part of the story, because it's a fairly good insulator. You see just a few feet of lava and he's able to stand on top of it without burning himself, and this fact that it crusts over and self-insulates allows the lava to travel with its fluidity and low viscosity and insulated roof for quite a distance on down the slope of the volcano from Pu'u'o'o on down to the Pali itself. When it reaches the Pali, there is a break in slope, and the idea is much higher gradient, and we're looking downslope now to the break at the Pali and on downslope even further to the ocean shore. As the lava goes down the Pali, it speeds up, and of course the heat of the lava is terrible on the environmental success of the forests there. It may be helpful to return again to the schematic profile. Let's do that. The flows cap themselves with crusting over and then run out from under themselves, thus making lava tubes. Occasionally the crust breaks open and one gets skylights, and then it comes to what may have been many 100,000 years ago the original edge of the island, the cliff, and it increases in speed as it goes down the steeper portion, then comes to a bench and forms new land essentially out into the ocean. As you'll see in some of the footage that we'll show, there are bench cracks, and sometimes these bench portions slump down because the water depth here in the ocean is about 3,000 feet. We have worked our way down onto the bench, and if we turn around and look back upslope from the ocean and the bench, we can see that the lava is arriving, having been speeded up a little bit by the flow down the poly, but then it gets to the bench, slows down, and eventually creeps on out and oozes over the bench into the ocean, making copious steam as it loses its heat and boils the ocean water. Let's watch this process as this pahoehoe flow comes creeping forward in daylight. Again, let's see this on the profile so we understand it. And then it comes to what may have been many 100,000 years ago, the original edge of the island, the cliff, and it increases in speed as it goes down the steeper portion, then comes to a bench and forms new land essentially out into the ocean. As you'll see in some of the footage that we'll show, there are bench cracks, and sometimes these bench portions slump down because the water depth here in the ocean is about 3,000 feet. While the national park is very permissive of tourists walking out onto this and watching, you see in the picture, in the center of the picture, a crack which is essentially separating part of what is built out, and this whole ocean side may slump into the ocean. And while the park is permissive, as we said, they must monitor this when it's happening, because if some tourists were to be standing there, they could find themselves swoosh down into 3,000 feet of water. So here one of the park personnel is actually measuring the opening of that crack. Here is a sketch modified after Moore and others, 1972, and Peterson, 1976, showing how this shelf builds out at the edge. In a few moments later in this tape, you will get to see this process actually happening in the daylight and in the dark. Again, let's return to the ABC cross-section and review what was said. We're right here at the edge of the bench, and as the lava goes on into the ocean in our schematic, it drops below sea level and balls up into balls of lava that quench. Other pieces of the lava get spattered out as steam and violent reactions occur.
Maximum depth here of the underwater structure is about 25 feet. This is still probably taking the second, it's the third day of the eruption. Looking back up again toward the surface, sometimes see the clouds here are very dramatic. That's where matter is hitting the ocean. I have a lot of topside material of this eruption too, which I haven't got around to taping yet. Probably will be available on another tape. These are Moorish idols, which are not much bothered by this lava activity. Not sure what that little fish is. Kind of a close-up shot. Looking up the slope again here toward the, there's a little kind of a, it looks almost like a bird fluttering through the water there. And actually it's apparently some little bit of light, fluffy lava material. That's the reason for using that particular scene. Back here to Pillow Lava Formation. And a lot of sputtering, a lot of bubbling, a lot of smoke or steam coming out, much more so than in the earlier material done 12, 13 years ago, and you'll see that later on. And much less molten lava in these pillow formations. Every once in a while it will turn red. Again, this is will be a third or fourth generation tape. even one generation more if you consider the original was done on 16 millimeter film. Two pillows forming at once here, one just below the window. The one in the lower right sort of stopped just as we started filming. Material spurting out from the top of the pillow. Spitting out a couple of rocks there. On to another scene. The implosions which caused the pillow to collapse every once in a while. The lower pillow, another pillow forming higher up, and a big portion breaking loose, moving down the slope here, very ragged looking. A lot of popping and bubbling. Some molten lava, the whole thing collapses, implodes, falls down the slope, opens up. You see molten lava as it pours down the slope, breaks loose, seems to catch a tremendous amount of popping and sputtering.
As we see this waterfront fireworks, you see a lot of stuff flying through the air and plunging into the ocean as spatter, and this would be called pyroclastic, meaning broken by fire, and the piling up of this on the coastal front we've seen in a previous cross section. The deposit of that on the cliff below the water makes it have a new name in geological terminology, hyoclastite, and it's a type of rock that has been water quenched and put together underwater. Here we see the water is perhaps somewhat trapped in the spatter cone that's building right at the edge. The lava runs out with enough gusto, with enough volume, that it protrudes just to the edge, and if you recall in the preceding profile by Patterson and Moore and others, tubes tend to go down, and again the insulation power of the tube, but when the tube hits the water leaks in, it causes expansion, it causes this almost explosive, and if you look at the four walls of this spatter cone, they are all rubble, completely fragmented pieces of lava. The Polynesian belief in Pele, they call this essentially Pele's lettuce because they spatter out in large broad leaves and quench that way. The Polynesian word, if I remember right, is lemu, and what we're seeing is that kind of spatter built up. As this drops off into the water and quenches, again, the shape is preserved to some extent until the waves pound it apart at least, and it progrades on out, making up perhaps a very loose, slippery slope, in the current use of the word slippery, very jagged of course, so we're just being cute when we say slippery, and these jaggedy fragments build, as you saw in Lee Tepley's footage, the pillow basalts come out as big blobs, and they tend to form a round ball, and this is because of the surface tension of the glass as it's quenching. If one is willing to hazard a walk in the dark on such treacherous terrain, you can get out and see this happening at night. Doesn't get any better than this. It's worth a walk. Here's Pele eating her spaghetti. Actually, it's the wife of the volcanologist, the guy who took the footage. And you know that the wife has to be a patient person, or at least very interested in geology, to walk half the night to see this kind of show. Unbelievable. Paley left Tahiti in a long canoe. Here, in Herb Connie's words, is the story of her search for a new home. In the form of a great shark, her elder brother, Kamoho'ali'i, the custodian of the water of life, guided the canoe northward. Some of her brothers and sisters sailed with her. Their first landfall was in the northern islands of the Hawaiian Archipelago. Pele needed a deep pit for her home wherein the sacred fires could be protected. She moved down the island chain through Ni'au and Kauai, digging, but she had been followed from Tahiti by her angry sister Namaka o Kahai of the sea, and wherever Pele excavated a crater with her digging stick, her sister deluged it with water. Pele then moved further along the island chain, but each effort to dig a home was flooded out. Thus we find that on the geologically older island of Kauai, the craters have become wet swamps, and volcanic evidence becomes progressively more recent as we move down the island chain towards Hawaii. The myth coincides with the modern geologic theory of shifting plates, in which these islands were built in an assembly line as the ocean floor slid northwestward over a hot spot in the underlying layer of the Earth's crust. Namaka, being Pele's elder sister, was more powerful, for water was believed to be more powerful than fire. Theirs was the eternal opposition between these two elements. Some say that Namaka's relentless pursuit ended in a battle near Hana, Maui, in which Pele was torn apart. A hill named Ka'iwi Ao Pele, the bones of Pele, stands at the site of battle and is believed to be her mortal remains. With the death of her mortal self, her spirit was freed and elevated to godly status. This event, having taken place in the Hawaiian Islands, made her a goddess native to these islands. Her spirit took flight to the island of Hawai'i, where she found a permanent home on Mauna Loa, Earth's largest mountain. As we see, the Hawaiian Islands are indeed in a long line. It's variously known as the Hawaiian Archipelago, or other people call it the Emperor Chain of Islands. And there is a systematic change in age from the northwest to the southeast, getting younger and younger, as you're now seeing. For example, volcanism stopped on Kauai about 4 to 5 million years ago. On Hawaii, over 99% of the island has had a new coating of lava within the last 5,000 years. So we've now heard two theories. One, that Pele poked in each of these islands to try to make a fire pit, and the other theory that there is an assembly line with something called a hot spot. It's necessary to come to the islands and realize that there is an age progression as one goes from Hawaii through Lanai and Maui to the northwest past Molokai through Oahu and up to Kauai. That will help us in this understanding. In Herb's story, he spoke of a hot spot. What exactly is a hot spot? Here in the material in front of you, we have a cross-section right through the center of the Earth with a white-hot inner core, a still very hot, perhaps 3,000 degrees centigrade outer core, and the theory that the green mantle of the inner Earth, while it is really essentially solid, certainly not liquid like the core, nevertheless can, with geologic time of millions of years, and driven by the terrible, strong thermal convection of 3,000 degrees in the outer core and 20 degrees centigrade where we live, create heat convection, and here and there at places this heat will rise clear to the surface, forming a so-called mantle plume, also called a hot spot. It's what Herb Connie, in his reference to it, called a fixed hot spot. So in the heat flow of the Earth, a plume is part of the geologic theory that explains the Hawaiian island. Combined with this plume, there's also the need to have motion in the Earth's plates. Here we have a schematic where the mantle is still in green and the outer core is shown, and the plume is focused in a given fixed place. As time passes and the surface of the crust of the Earth moves, each of the islands is formed, as we see, and moved to the northwest, and the heat continues and burns, you might say, a new pile of volcanic emanations that grow up out of the blue ocean and become subaerial in an island. We're showing this progression. Again, concentrate on the fact that there is a fixed plume still working in today's world underneath Hawaii.
And we're actually going to focus right over here where the Pacific Ocean is and the Hawaiian Islands, since the Hawaiian Islands are composed of volcanoes. And if we focus on the Hawaiian Islands, here they are, and follow them along, we see little underwater mountains going off in a line. And the way we think this happened was there is a hot spot, or a spot where there's hot magma coming up from the mantle, sitting in this spot, and the plate where all of this is moving, creating this line of mountains. So we have a hot spot here. The plate's moving in that direction, so this is the last hot spot.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have this plate here, and new crust is being created along this ridge here. Looks like a little alligator back or something. And this is spreading, creating new crust at about 5 centimeters per century. And as this moves, it pushes the plate along. And our hot spot is stationary, so it's not moving. And as the plate moves along this way, it creates little mountains and ridges, which eventually become the islands. So the very last Hawaiian island is where the hot spot is and where the plate is right now. So as the big island of Hawaii is being created, the plate is still moving and a new spot is starting to be created below the ocean surface. So we have a new island being created underwater called the Hawai'i. Okay. So now to demonstrate this hotspot system, my sister's gonna come over and help me demonstrate what this actually looks like. So Selena is going to be a hotspot using this blowtorch, and I'm going to be the plate using this cookie pan.
And what have you done with the cookie pan?
Okay, I will do it. Here you go. Go ahead. Okay, so this will be our imaginary hotspot, and this is going to be our Pacific plate. We've covered the bottom of this cookie pan with paint so that when we move our plate across the hotspot, we'll create blisters that will represent the Hawaiian Islands. So I know will be the Pacific plate. So we have our hotspot. Now I'm going to hold the hotspot stationary because the hotspot doesn't move. The plate moves over the hotspot. So Marina's going to be the Pacific plate, and it's going to be moving to the northwest and creating a chain of imaginary volcanoes. Let's go for it. So here's our plate. And
We can see it blackening as the heat impinges.
Volcanoes start occurring, and we get another little hot spot. And we're going to keep moving. If I get too close. So we've even got smoke for good volcano effects. And we're getting pretty close, and I can feel the torch underneath this, so... And that's where the hot spot is. This is Hawaii now, today.
Very good.
So, we have a chain of islands here. This is the youngest, which would be the big island of Hawaii. Okay, so now we have a chain of islands. This is the oldest island, and this is the youngest island, and the plate moved off this way. This island would represent the big island of Hawaii, and this would be the furthest island, which is the oldest. And our matches.
Mother Nature has better luck than you do.
There we go. So we have a hot spot lit. If I turn that hot spot down a little bit.
And why don't you tell us what you do with this pan?
Okay, we're going to try this with a pan covered with wax and see what kind of imaginary volcanoes we get with this. So, here we go. Okay, so I'll hold the hot spot down here stationary. Marina's going to move our supposed Pacific plate over the hot spot to the northwest. Here it goes. And there we see it moving, and we actually moving pretty fast here. There we go. It's just more of a line than little spots. And there we go. Turn off our hot spot. So we started over here where the plate started over here and moved this way. Sorry. And this is where we ended, where the new volcanoes are forming.
Okay.
I hope that came out good. Okay, behind us is the vent called Pu'o on Mauna Loa, which is on the big island of Hawaii. And what we did today was we demonstrated how a hotspot works and how the volcanic chain of islands of Hawaii form by using a blowtorch as the hotspot and a pan covered with paint as the Pacific plate moving to the northwest, creating a straight chain of islands.
On the Orchid Island.
Hey Rachel, what are you doing?
I'm reading a really cool book about the goddess Pele by Herb Connie.
Why are you reading that?
Because it's got really cool information about the Hawaiian Islands. This picture right here is actually from the book.
Really? I thought the Polynesians were the first people to go to Hawaii.
Well, they were. They may have came from Tahiti.
That's really far away. How did they get there?
They came in sailing canoes. This picture right here, let's take a closer look. They discovered the Hawaiian Islands were actually a chain of islands. Polynesians believe that the goddess Pele created them.
That's right. Pele needed a place to keep the sacred fires burning, but her sister, Namakwa, kept putting out the fires wherever they went. They fought and fought from the island of Kauai to the big island of Hawaii, where Namakwa wasn't able to put out the fire there.
But science tells a different story. Scientists believe that the islands are really active due to a hotspot deep within the mantle.
That's true, but even today, the Hawaiians still believe in the goddess Pele. In fact, look here. This is an artist's idea of Pele sitting on Hawaii. And of course, we all know that Hawaii has lots of volcanic activity.
What about this painting? What are they doing? It's really cool that the people there actually honor their goddess Pele.
As you can see, this area of the Halemaumau crater is sacred to the Hawaiians. With very kind permission, we've been allowed to film a very few seconds of part of a ceremony making an offering to Pele. It is believed by the Polynesians that this fire pit on the side of Mauna Loa is indeed Pele's home.
Hang loose, everybody.